I previously ranked the characters from Suikoden 1 through 4 as well as tactics, and there were definitely a lot of controversial picks in those videos that got some people mad. If you want to check out those videos, there'll be links to them in the description below. But now it's time for the long awaited and long overdue Suikoden V character ranking video. And this is the one I've been most looking forward to making, as Suikoden V has my overall favourite cast in the series. There are so many characters in this game that I love that I always struggle to form a party. I can't bring everyone even though I want to bring everyone, so I generally cycle parties and bring a different group for each story event to try and use as many characters as possible. I'm going to have to restrain myself here because once I start blabbing about Suikoden V, it's hard to get me to shut up, and this could easily be over 2 hours long, but I'll try my best to keep it around an hour. Now I say this at the start of every character ranking video, I even put it in the video name and in the description, but this is not a combat tier list, this is a personal favourites ranking list. Unfortunately, I have to once again reiterate that because on every character list video I've made so far, there's always some idiots in the comments getting angry because I haven't put the elite tier combat characters in the S tier. I'm ranking characters based on how much I personally like the character, and that's based on their story, their backstory, their design, and how fun they are in combat, not necessarily how good they are in combat. So yes, you may see great combat characters ranked poorly or bad combat characters ranked highly, because how good a character is in combat is the least important aspect of a character to me in Suikoden. Suikoden is an incredibly easy series, and even with a party full of the worst characters in the games tend to offer very little challenge, so there's no need for that min-maxing nonsense by, filling your party with the best combat characters. So again, this is a personal favourites ranking list, and their combat ability matters very little in their ranking. Suikoden has such a large and diverse cast of characters in every game. Everyone is going to have different opinions on the characters depending on their own personal tastes. So if I rank your favourites low or your least favourites high, who cares? It's not a big deal. This list is just the opinion of some random person on the internet. If you like the characters, that's great. If you don't like them, cool, that's fine too. You all know by now that some of my takes on these characters goes against the majority opinion, and I love to start these lists with a controversial pick, either by placing a character that's beloved by the fandom but who I don't like in the lower ranks, or by putting a character hated by the fandom but who I like into the higher ranks. So let's once again start with a controversial pick to get people riled up and reaching for their pitchforks. And who better to start with than Barrows? One of the most hated characters in Suikoden V, but also the most misunderstood character in Suikoden V. He's a whiny, snotty, entitled rich kid who always gets what he wants and sets out to ruin your good name and screw you over at every possibility. On the surface, he's a horrible person, and it's totally understandable why everyone hates him. But if you look beyond the surface and look into his past, he's not all that bad. Was just a normal kid until his older brother was murdered. And when his brother died, his mother suffered from depression and shut herself away from the world. Was only about 7 or 8 years old at the time, and he put on this act of being a needy little baby to try and help his mother overcome her depression by making her feel needed. That she still had other children she needed to look out for and be strong for. When you keep up an act for so long and pretend to be someone you're not, especially at such a young age, parts of that fake personality might seep into who you are and you might lose yourself. And then when he got a little older, his father took him under his wing and started teaching him his ways, and we all know what a sack of garbage Barrows is. When his father died, his mother opened his eyes to all of his wrongdoings and set him back on the right path, where he tries his hardest to redeem himself by righting all of his family's wrongs, just as his sister Lucerina had been doing. Deep down, isn't a bad person. He's been misguided and corrupted by his father's influence. It doesn't excuse the bad things that he's done, but he's a greatly misunderstood character, and I'm going to put Barrows into the A tier. I know that is a highly controversial pick, and some people, maybe many people, will strongly disagree with me there. And as we've ranked that brings me to his father, Barrows. Absolutely disgusting, reprehensible piece of human garbage. He represents everything that is wrong with the rich elite. A selfish, greedy, obnoxious, manipulative snob who cares about nothing and no one but his own desires and gaining more power for his family. Characters like Solemn are tough to rank. He's a horrible person and he's rotten to his core. I despise him, I despise everything he is, but we're supposed to hate him and he plays his role perfectly. So I'm going to put Solemn Barrows, I'll put him in the B tier, right behind his son, because his son has a much better character arc than he does. And if we're ranking them, we have to rank Lucerina Barrows with them. She's a sweetheart. She's the polar opposite in every way from her father and brother. I'm going to put Lucerina in the B tier along with her father. I know, kind of controversial because it's lower than Yoram, but I have a soft spot for Yoram with his backstory and his growth, and Lucerina is just she's too perfect. You know, she's so perfect in just about every way that there's no room for growth with her character. And really, I have a soft spot for Yoram with his backstory. So Lucerina is going in the B tier. Maybe that is a very controversial decision for the Barrows family, but I really liked how the Barrows family were portrayed. And now that we've ranked the Barrows, let's rank the Godwins, Gazelle and Marskal. Of all the major antagonists in the Suikoden series, these two felt like the smallest stakes bad guys. Windy wanted revenge against the world. Luca would have burned the world to ash. Luke would have destroyed a continent and potentially altered fate. Graham was a broken man that would have crumbled nations to relive the memories of his child. But the Godwins, their interests were much smaller. They wanted a stronger Falena to defeat Falena's enemies. Sure, they had xenophobic views and tried exterminating the non-human races, but, on a large scale, their interests didn't really compare to the other antagonists. Not that that's a bad thing, it was nice to see a more confined conflict, but in terms of character development, they're at best mediocre characters. Marskal, who was supposed to be the far more intelligent and tactical of the two, left his son Gazelle, who was very reckless, manipulative, and loved risky gambits, to take the lead for their entire plan. Gazelle didn't even seem fully motivated or interested in his dad's plan. There were times where he seemed completely unbothered and uninterested, as if, he just went along with his dad's wishes for the ride. They're not the most interesting or compelling characters. Marskal took a backseat for the vast majority of the game, and Gazelle at times gave the impression that he just didn't really care. I think they're both C-tier villains at best, and I think the Barrows family received far more development than they did, and they were far more compelling characters than the Godwins were. And continuing with the villains, I may as well rank the rest of them. Let's start with Kilderic. What an awful character. I'm putting him straight into the garbage tier. He's a generic, insane, bloodthirsty psychopath. I never have and never will like this type of villain being pushed into a prominent role. They're such lazily written characters. He is absolute garbage. Next up is Dolph. I think he's a missed opportunity. They didn't delve into Nethergate or into his past with Leon as deeply as they could have. He's a C-tier villain that could have been much higher if his character was fleshed out more. I think Nethergate in general was a bit of a missed opportunity. I'm going to put Dolph into the C tier. Next up we have Barum Luger and Dilber Novum, the Admiral and the General. Dilber is blindly loyal to Marskal Godwin because Marskal saved his life in battle during the Arma's invasion 8 years prior to the game. He feels internally indebted to the Godwins, and this blind loyalty lets him turn a blind eye to all of the wrongdoings of the Godwins. He just comes across as a bland general who's overly loyal and without any real personality of his own. I'm going to put Dilber into the D tier. And Barum is a character that I'm conflicted on. He believes in the Godwin's ideals of a stronger Falena and cultural homogeneity, making him complicit in the attempted genocide of the Beavers and the Dwarves. But when he witnessed Kilderic slaughtering villagers, he was disgusted. At that point, I think he knew he was on the wrong side of the conflict, but he was never going to do anything about it because deep down he still believed in the Godwin's plans for Falena. I'm going to put Barum in the C tier, and I don't know why Barum's picture is so discoloured like that, so just ignore that. And then next up we have Elenia and Zahak. I really like these two. Elenia feels very human. Yes, she's a highly skilled fighter, but for a Queen's Knight, she's very emotional. She's prone to bursts of anger and jealousy, which sometimes leads to her making rash decisions. She's very clearly either in love with Gazelle or strongly attracted to him, and she's being eaten alive with jealousy because of his attention towards Syleeds. She's a horrible person, don't get me wrong, she fully agrees with the Godwin's ideals, and she's a willing participant in their actions, but she feels real. And then you have Zahak, who, just like with Seymour from Final Fantasy X, you knew the moment you saw this guy that he was a bad guy. He just gave off that aura. Right after Ferid and George, he's the best swordsman of the Queen's Knights. He's calm but cold, almost the polar opposite of Elenia. He's willing to do whatever it takes to win the battle and slow the enemy down, but he's very calculated in how he does it. If you are on an offensive campaign in a foreign nation, he's exactly the type of person you'd want in command of a unit. But on the defensive and in a civil war, his tactics were counterproductive and you can't sacrifice your own nation's civilians the way he did. His actions lost the Godwins support of towns that were loyal to them. I'm going to put them both in the B tier as I really liked Elenia and Zahak. So they are both going into the B tier. Though B tier I don't think fully does them justice. They're more B+, not quite A but better than B, but I'm going to leave them in the B tier because I don't want to do plus tiers, there's already too many. And then to wrap up the antagonists, we have Mahasparna and Jidan Gizu, both members of the hardline pro-war Darja clan and armies. Mahasparna was the commander of the Southern Marine Corps and her second in command was Jidan Gizu. Two rotten, slimy, self-centered, opportunistic commanders searching for pretty much every chance they can for personal fame and glory. They don't really care about armies, they're greedy and they only care about themselves and how much they can advance their own career. Absolutely horrible, rotten characters, but they're exactly what they're supposed to be. So I'm going to put them both into the B tier. So Jidan Gizu into the B tier. Now where is Mahasparna? There you are. So that pretty much covers the antagonists, the villains for Suikoden V. I think the major villains are Suikoden V's biggest shortcoming. The majority of them weren't as compelling or interesting as they could have been or should have been. Suikoden V is right up there, just slightly behind Suikoden 2. But if some of Suikoden V's antagonists had a little more depth and were explored just a little more, I think many people would view Suikoden V as being on par with Suikoden 2 or perhaps even exceeding it. Which might be a controversial thing for me to say, but that is how I feel. And since we ranked Elenia and Zahak, we have to rank the rest of the Queen's Knights. Galleon, George, Kyle, Mia Keys, and the Queen's Knight's apprentice, Leon. What even needs to be said about George Prime? We all know he's a top tier character, he's got a badass design and an awesome backstory. He fought as a mercenary alongside Ferid in his youth, then he fought alongside Barbarossa in the War of Succession in the Scarlet Moon Empire. Then he became an Ebony Moon Knight in the Grasslands before coming to Falena at Ferid's request to become a Queen's Knight. And next we'll see him again in Starleap, before he finally headed north to fight in the Dunan Unification War. Wherever there's a major conflict, he seems to pop up and kick ass. He's an awesome character. I think I ranked him in the A tier in the Suikoden 2 character ranking video, but because he's got so much story and involvement in Suikoden 5, and that really fleshes out his character a lot more, I'm going to push George up into the S tier where he belongs. He's an awesome character and I can't wait to see more of him in Starleap. Next up is Galleon. I've always had a soft spot for him. On my first playthrough, he was my favourite of all of the Queen's Knights. I loved his look, I loved his fighting style, I loved his personality. He was the hardened veteran who encompassed pretty much everything it meant to be a knight, and I thought he was really cool. His hometown being Lord Lake and how he managed to stay loyal even after what happened made him even more intriguing to me. I'm going to put Galleon into the S tier. And then we have Kyle, the carefree womanizer. He's a decent swordsman and a decent mage. He played a pretty big and important role in the first half of the game, and then he kind of fizzled out and done nothing in the second half. I didn't like his ending in the game. I don't know why he quit the Queen's Knights at the end of the game. It took me by surprise that he just up and quit and left the country to go live a peaceful life. That didn't really strike me as fitting of his personality. He was fiercely loyal to the royal family. I expected him to stick around protecting Lim. I figured he would have embraced his newfound fame from the war to continue his womanizing ways. I just didn't think the ending was fitting for his character at all. Overall though, he is a solid character, so I'm going to put him in the B tier. And then we have Miyake's. My girl, I don't care what anyone says, I love her to bits. She's cute, she's funny, and she kicks ass. She's also terrifying. She threatened to castrate Rai for impersonating the prince in the bathhouse. And I believe she also threatened to castrate Yoram in the Japanese version. So maybe don't get on her bad side. I think she's awesome. I'm putting Miyake's into the S tier. I like her way more than I like Leon, and I wish she had a more prominent role in the story. Which brings me to Leon. As a character, she's great. She's got a good backstory and she's got a good story throughout the game. But in all honesty, I liked my party more when Miyake's was my temporary bodyguard than the entire time Leon was in my party. Don't get me wrong, she's a great character. There's nothing wrong with her. She's just too ever-present, if you know what I mean. I know you're the prince's bodyguard, Leon, but give me some space to breathe. I like her, but I'm also annoyed by her constant presence. A bit like how many of us feel about Gremio and Nanami. Constantly forcing a character into your party makes them overstay their welcome, and it does create a bit of resentment. And for that, I'm going to put Leon into the B tier. Which might be controversial, as I know a lot of people do love Leon. And then we have the commander of the Queen's Knights. We have Ferid himself. I don't know how anyone can't love Ferid. He's the fun-loving, cool dad with a really laid-back personality, and he kicks just about as much ass as George Prime. Ferid is going into the S tier because he's got just as cool of a backstory as George does. Then we do, of course, have to rank his wife, Arshtat. I can't really discuss her backstory too much as it'll spoil the History of Felena video that I'm going to make. All I'll say is that Arshtat and Ferid are both fantastic characters. They started out so happy together, but their stories quickly turned tragic because of the slimy schemes of the nation's nobles, and the ending to their stories is even more tragic. Their death scene is easily the most heartbreaking scene in the entire series. I'm putting them both into the S tier, and I think that's a very fair ranking for them. I love those two characters. I would have loved to have had more time with them or seen them more. I hope Starleap and the anime are a success because I really hope we get some more novels or short stories to flesh out the world, just like we did back in the series' golden years. But I'd also love an anime of Suikoden V just so we can see more of Felena. It's possibly my favourite nation of all of the nations we've seen so far. And since I've ranked Arshtat and Ferid, I've got to rank the rest of the royal family. I am starting this one off with all the heavy hitters. I don't know if there's going to be many heavy hitters left for the end, but Freyador, the prince, you are going straight into the S tier. It's no secret that he's my favourite of all of the protagonists in the series. I love his design, I love his fighting style, and I love his story. I love pretty much everything about his character, except for maybe his outfit that he wears for the majority of the game. I wish we had the option of using one of his other two outfits, the orange and white royal outfit from the beginning of the game or his MacDull inspired red outfit. I think those two outfits look so much better. As for Limslea, she's your lovable and annoying bratty little sister. You really do have to feel for her and her circumstances. She's only 10 and the country's nobles pushed, pressured and asserted their influence for the sacred games to be held to get her a fiancé. Then her fiancé's family staged a coup leading to the deaths of her parents and her brother being labelled a fugitive. Then she was forced to marry Gazelle, who was more than twice her age. And then she watched helplessly as the nation was plunged into a civil war. Lim's story is horrible and it's something that will leave her with trauma for life. I'm putting her in the A tier instead of the S tier because she can be annoying at times, but I suppose that does come with being a child. And then we have their aunts, Syalides and Haswar. Cyalides is a bit of a tough one. I know a lot of people have mixed feelings on her because of certain events that happened during the story. Some people don't understand her reasons, some people think what she did was unnecessary, and some people think she was ultimately right for doing what she did. But you know what? I'm going to hold back on discussing it in depth here because this has given me an idea for a video. All I'll say is that I love Cyalide's character and she is going to go into the A tier. And then we have their other aunt, Haswar. You know, she's really sweet and she has her funny overbearing auntie moments where she hugs you and dotes on you just a little too much. I'm going to put her into the B tier. I like her, but I don't really have a whole lot to say about her. Overall though, I really love the Flanan royal family. I thought they were all excellent characters. And by extension, we then have to rank Ferid's family, Skald and Bernadette Egan. Skald and Ferid they're very much alike. They're both laid-back, fun-loving, goofy dads, but you know, don't let their laid-back, fun-loving attitudes fool you because they are both exceptionally talented commanders. And when it's time to be serious, you know they'll throw down and put up a hell of a fight. And you can tell exactly where Ferid got his personality from the moment you met Skald on Norva Island. I don't know how anyone can't love either of those characters. As for Bernadette, I love her design. She's almost the opposite of her dad and brother in just about every way. She's always so serious, formal, and by the book. I love how Skald continuously tricks her into bending the rules and doing the right thing by playing the fool. Combat-wise, I do love her playstyle. She reminds me so much of Tengar being a long-range attacker with throwing knives and powerful magic, which is really what I look for in my mages. I generally tend to go for the hybrids over the pure mage builds. I'm going to put both of those characters into the S tier because I loved them just as much as I loved the royal family. Which brings me to the other Island Nations characters, Nellis and Yar. I love these two. They're Island Nations intelligence officers who get sent on special missions to track down rune cannons and rune shells. Nellis is actually a descendant of Pablo from Suikoden V, who is the kind of somewhat apprentice of Warlock who created the rune cannons and rune shells. I think they're both really well written characters. I like their stories and I love their design. And I really love their ending to the game. After witnessing the devastating power of rune shells, they destroyed the Island Nation's cache of rune shells and then fled the nation. The Island Nation characters are actually some of my favourites in Suikoden V. I'm putting both of them into the A tier. And you know what? I actually think, maybe this will be a bit controversial of me to say, I actually think that Suikoden V done the Island Nations better in the hour or so that they appeared here than Suikoden 4 and Tactics done in their entirety. The characters were more interesting, their designs were better, the art was nicer, the music was better. The whole vibe on Norva Island was better than how the islands felt in Suikoden 4. Maybe some people will agree with me, maybe not, but I genuinely think Suikoden 5 done the Island Nations better. That's a lot of big characters. That's a lot of big characters ranked, so let's see if we can get some quick fires out of the way because we need to save some heavy hitters for the end. Egbert Othelbald, if I pronounced his surname correctly. I think this guy is hilarious. I love him and I could listen to him rant for hours. I'm going to put him into the A tier. Gavaya. Oh man, this character creeps me out. I don't like him, I never did and I never will. I don't see how anybody can like him in all honesty. Everything about the way he acts is gross. He's the only character in the game that I've never used. I refuse to use him because of his personality and I never will use him. I am going to put Gavaya into the garbage tier where he belongs. Another quick character would be Subala. You all know how I feel about fishing minigames by now. I hate them, I have no interest in them. Subala really just exists to give us said fishing minigame. Now that said, she does have a fun little rivalry going on with Lun. I'll be fair, I'll say C tier because of that little little rivalry they've got going on. She did have a little bit of personality, so I won't hold the fishing minigame against her too much. Then we have Chuck. Chuck the Gentle Giant. I'm going to put you in C tier. Look, he's the warehouse guy with a heart of gold. What more can you really say about him? Another quick character would be Linfa. I think she's cute, she's funny, and she's got a fun little backstory of conning people at cards to get out of debt. And then when she finally gets out of debt, she goes immediately back into debt because she's really bad at cards and bluffing. I like her, and Blind Man's Bluff card game is a lot of fun to play, so I'm going to put Linfa into the B tier. Another quick one would be Byakuran. I think she's got a really cool design. She's a serpent that lives in Lake Ceres, and she got annoyed by the prince draining the water and establishing the castle as his base, as it became far too noisy for her liking. You know, what can you really say about her? She just wants to be left alone in her lake to live a quiet, peaceful life. I'm going to put her in the B tier. Then another one, I suppose, would be Geno. Again, I'm going to go in the B tier for him. I like him, but I don't really have a lot to say about him. I think he's an interesting character. He's been alive for over 1,000 years, but unfortunately his memory is a little foggy. What a convenient excuse by the writers to cheap out on not using him to give us chunks of lore, so B tier you go. And then another quick one would be Raven. He's the game's ninja thief style character, and as you know by now, I just don't really care for these kinds of characters in Suikoden. Sure, they have cool designs, but you know, they're just not for me, and I have absolutely no interest in Raven as a character, so he's going in E tier. He's not garbage. I think garbage would be unfair because, you know, he's not on the levels of Kilderic or Gavaya, but he's definitely a bottom tier character for me. Vicky, you can go into the S tier where you belong. She's our adorable and cute little airhead, and everybody loves her. If you don't love Vicky, there is something wrong with you. Who next? I'll rank Taylor, the journalist. I really like this guy because of the feature that he provides. I think the newspaper is a great way to kind of recap what you were doing, as well as to drop little tidbits of lore here and there. I think it's been a great feature ever since it was introduced in Suikoden 3. Taylor, I think, is a pretty cool character too. No matter how much he disagreed with the Godwin's methods and what they were doing, he never resorted to propaganda pieces, and he never sacrificed his journalistic integrity. He only ever published the truth. He actually had a very big role to play in the game too. He really shows how information can play a big role and how public perception can aid you. So I am going to put Taylor... I'm going to put Taylor in the A tier. I think he's a great character. So I think you can kind of see what I mean when I said that Suikoden 5 has my overall favourite cast of characters in the series. There are very few characters down in the lower tiers, and there are quite a lot of characters up in the higher tiers so far. But we still have a lot of characters to rank, so let's see if we can rank any more characters in groups. And I think I'll start with the Lindworm Mercenary Brigade, Wilhelm, Mueller, and Richard. Wilhelm is awesome. You know, he's the womanizing, laid-back captain who acts like he doesn't take things seriously, but, you know, don't let his attitude fool you. He's a very capable leader, and he honors every contract to the letter. I really liked his character. As for Mueller, I think Mueller is quite misunderstood. People often view him as being abusive towards Richard, but it's more of a tough love situation. Mueller actually rescued Richard from his abusive father, and by rescued I mean he killed Richard's dad. Yeah, he berated Richard for getting drugged and eliminated from the sacred games, but only after he knew Richard was okay. And yeah, he groaned a little about being back together again with Richard when they joined the prince, but I think that has more to do with how clingy Richard is towards him than anything. Richard basically idolizes Mueller and even rejected the chance to lead his own unit after the war because he wanted to stick with Mueller. And I know this isn't a combat tier list and I'm not factoring in their combat ability in their ranking, but I just want to say, Richard as the sole frontline character with the Tiger tactic is insane. He deflects and counters almost every single attack, which keeps everybody else nice and safe. The amount of damage he dishes out with that formation is crazy. I'm going to put all three of those characters into the A tier, and I think A tier is a very fair ranking for all of them. So I just need to find Mueller. There you are, all of you into the A tier. So again, 3 more characters ranked highly. And since I mentioned the Tiger tactic, I am going to rank another character who actually excels in the Tiger tactic, and that is Isabel. And along with Isabel, I'm going to rank Matthias, the Maximilian Knights. Well, Matthias isn't exactly a knight himself, but he pledged loyalty to Isabel, who is a knight. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because Isabel is just as good as Richard as the frontline unit in the Tiger tactic formation. If you haven't used it, and if you haven't put either of them in that formation at the front, do yourself a favour and do it. The amount of damage they will dish out is godly. But, you know, we're not here to discuss combat ability. I love the Maximilian Knights. I've always had a soft spot for them ever since Suikoden 1 when we met Maximilian himself. I also love that their recruitment event involved one of Barrows' schemes because it really let them shine and showed us what the Maximilian Knights represent. I'm going to put them both... Ooh, where will I put them? No, I'm going to put Isabel in S, and I'm going to put Matthias in A. I think that is a good ranking for them. And can I just quickly say that I really hope Starleap gives us a Maximilian Knight of some kind. Anyway, moving on, let's see if there are any other characters we can get out of the way with here. The bottom tiers are looking kind of empty, so I think I'm going to rank someone that I don't particularly care for, and that is Josephine. I don't hate her to the levels that I hate Gavaya and Kilderic, and I don't really dislike her the way I dislike Raven, but I really, really dislike her attitude. She really grates me and gets on my nerves. She's by far my least favourite narcissist in the entire series. I'm going to be generous, and I'm going to put her into the D tier. I was leaning towards E tier, but I'm being generous and I'm saying D tier because I do like her backstory a little bit, and I'll explain why here. Because next I am going to rank her brother Shula Valya. So Josephine is Shula's younger sister, and she hates armies. She thinks it's a disgusting place with no fashion and they're a backwards barbaric society, so she fled and she was looking to upclass, if you will. Anyway, Shula Valya, he is the commander of the Army's Western Marine Corps. Now, I think you know how highly I'm going to rank this guy. He is one of my favourite characters in the series, which by now you should know based on my YouTube name being a mesh of Colgan from Suikoden 2 and Shula Valya from Suikoden 5. I love these calm, composed commanders. He's from a more moderate clan within armies, and he really shines a different light on the nation from the one we'd been shown up to the point of his introduction. Up until this point in the story, they were hostile, antagonistic, and expansionist. They hated Falena, and from what we heard in Sable, Falenans hated them too because of the nation's history of war. But Shula's role in the story teaches us about armas. They're not exactly a united nation under one banner, they're more of a cooperative nation made up of 5 different clans. Everything we had seen up until this point was from the warmongering Darja clan who led the Southern Marine Corps commanded by Mahasparna and Jidan Gizu. Shula came from the Madra clan and King Jalad came from the Ishvak clan. Both clans were more moderate and wished for peace and good relations rather than war. But King Jalad was unable to prevent the Darja clan from allying with the Godwins, just like how the Falanan royal family couldn't always act against the wishes of noble families like the Godwins and the Barrows. So while he couldn't prevent the Darja clan, he did the next best thing. He sent Shula and the Western Marine Corps to keep an eye on Mahasparna's Southern Marine Corps to make sure they didn't commit any atrocities, which is exactly what Shula did without involving himself or his men in the war itself. And after the Darja clan's Southern Marine Corps got annihilated and Mahasparna fled, the Darja clan and the Hardliners lost much of their influence, and then King Jalad was able to take advantage of that by pursuing his goal of building friendly relations with Falena. which is exactly what he did by sending Shulavalya to meet the prince. One of the reasons I love Shulavalya so much is because of how much we learn of the New Armus Kingdom just from his existence. His personality, his story, and his design are all excellent too. He's going in the S tier where he belongs. He is one of my favourite characters in the entire series. The only thing that I dislike about him is that he's not a combat character. I would have loved to have been able to use him in combat. And then his bodyguards, Nifsara and Sharmista. Nifsara is going right into the garbage tier. She's the female Gavaya, and since I hate Gavaya, I have to be consistent and hate her for the same reason. She teasingly creeps on guys she finds attractive, including those half her age and younger. She's 25, so you do the math. I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there thinking they'd love to have had her creep on them at that age growing up. And teenage me loved her too. But then I grew up and realised how creepy she is, and I've hated her ever since. She belongs in the garbage tier. Then for Sharmista, I love her. She's a lifelong friend of Shula's, and she seems to be the brains of the group. She's a near exact clone of Cyalides, and she's recruited right at the perfect time. So if you love Cyalides and she was a mainstay in your party, Sharmista is the perfect replacement who arrives at the perfect time. Sharmista can go into the A tier. Next up, I'll get all of the beavers out of the way with Maroon, Meroon, Miroon, Maroon, Maroon, and Fuwalu, if I said all of those correctly. They're alright, they're okay. I don't particularly care much for them, but I have nothing against them. I do think they're a godsend in war battles for wrecking the enemy fleets. I'm gonna put them all in the C tier. If I can find them all here. So C tier for Fuwalu. Let me put them all. You know, actually, I'm not going to put them all in the C tier. I'm going to put one of them lower. And let me explain my reasoning for that when I drag them all down. I'm going to put... I can't remember which one this one is. It Maroon? Maroon? I'm going to put him into the E tier. He's the only one that I didn't like. Why is he dressed like he's in an 80s rock band? And where the hell did he get an electric guitar from? His design kind of hurts my immersion in the game, so he is being ranked much lower than his fellow beavers. And next I'll rank Orok, Volga and Wazel, the three leaders of Lelkar's three islets. They're somewhat important characters in the story, but they had very little involvement in the game outside of Lelkar. So Lelkar was actually originally ruled by Lord De Beers, who fled during the war as the prince's army was getting closer and closer to Lelkar. De Beers was a very flip-floppy person in his beliefs, and he generally sided with whichever faction had more momentum and support at the time. You know, he'd chop and change from the Barrows to the Godwins to the Reveres, and by the time of Suikoden V he was leaning more towards the Godwins. This really split the town, and you had factions form within the villagers themselves. So Orok, who led the western islet, tended to believe in the Godwins. Volga, who led the eastern islet, didn't really side with any faction, but rather he looked out for the townspeople themselves and took care of the orphans. While Wazel, who led the central islet, was more pro-monarchy, and he was often stuck playing mediator between Orok and Volga. I thought the clash in their personalities and their beliefs made them an interesting trio. Little interesting fact about Orok though, despite him joining you, he still shares the Godwin's core beliefs. He was just disgusted by their methods and their cruelty. I do think ranking them is tough. I like their stories, but their story involvement is minimal at best, and that does hurt their placement. I'm going to put them in the B tier, but I think they could have been ranked higher in the A tier had they had a bigger involvement in the game. You know, if they were more fleshed out. It looks like we're only about halfway through and there are still a lot of characters left to rank, so let's rank the Dragon Cavalry. I think if I rank them, I can get a chunk of characters out of the way with together. Craig, Rahal, Rug, Nick, Yoran, Axe, Flail and Lance. We'll do the dragon horses themselves first, Axe, Flail and Lance. You know, what can you really say about them? They've got pretty cool designs and their personalities feel like extensions of Nick, Rahal and Rug themselves. Lance is probably my favourite of the three. In the past, as a young dragon, he was He was considered to be quite volatile and aggressive to the point where no one thought he'd ever make a mount, that no one would ever be able to ride him. Until I think Rug won him over by roughhousing with him, wrestling with him, which I think is a pretty funny backstory. So I'm going to put all three of them into... I'm going to put them in the C tier. There isn't really a whole lot you can say about them. They're just mounts. And then we will rank the riders themselves. Rahal and Rug. They're a bit like the Alan Grenseal or the Camus and Miklatov of Suikoden V. You've got the level-headed Rahal and the impulsive Rug. It's a duo that's worked really well since the series' inception. They've got great chemistry together, and I'm going to put them both in the A tier. Next up, Nick. So Nick is the Dragon Cavalry Apprentice, and I'll rank his friend Yoran with him, who is the Dragon Horse Caretaker Apprentice. I think they're fine characters. They didn't really have, a whole lot to do in the game, but the tiny portion that they did have was quite important, and I think it really let their personality shine. Nick being a highly talented apprentice with bags of potential, only to be, the worst flute player in the world that makes the dragons go crazy, I think is pretty funny. So I'm going to put Nick and Yoran I'm going to put them in the B tier. Now I just need to find Nick wherever you are. There you are. You can go into the B tier as well. So again, all of these characters are getting pushed up into the higher tiers. There's very few below C. And when we round off the Dragon Horse Cavalry with Craig, I don't know. See, he's too stubborn and too traditionalist, and that rigidness, I think, is what led to many of the problems that the Dragon Cavalry faced throughout the game. His refusal, his unwillingness to bend the rules or adapt to a situation led to the Godwins holding the dragon eggs hostage. I mean, did he really think, with all of the atrocities that the Godwins were attempting to commit throughout the game, that they'd leave the Dragon Cavalry alone? He's a flawed character, but I think that's what makes him such an interesting character. I'm going to put him up in the A tier. I think I'll rank Cathari next. I'm in the minority in that I never really cared for the Howling Vice Guild, and part of that reasoning stems from the fact that I don't like guns in medieval fantasy settings. But I will admit that my thoughts on the Howling Vice Guild changed when I met Cathari. She showed me a different side to the organisation with her personality and how she actively tried to help to dissuade Harmonia from interfering and getting involved in Felena's business. And of course, in classic Suikoden V fashion, they revealed that Cathari and Lucretia are acquainted, which adds to the long list of stories we want to know the answer to, but which we'll never get. I did really like Cathari as a character. I'm going to put Cathari in the A tier. As for Lucretia, she's the only strategist in the series without any connection to the Silverbergs. I think she's got one of the coolest designs in the game. I love her outfit, but then again, I have a bit of a soft spot for the Karians. Plus, she's got one of the best backstories in the game. It's a really nice nod to Suikoden 3. She's a Karian whose first memories are of the destruction caused when the Flame Champion lost control of the True Fire Rune. Lucretia would have been around 3 at the time that happened, and it left her orphaned and no doubt traumatized. She ended up travelling to Harmonia and studying military strategy, and at some point became friends with Cathari before coming south to Felena. She's a bit of a Mary Sue, which did rub a lot of fans the wrong way. She seems to know everything and she's never wrong, which leads to the player never really feeling like you overcame the odds like Matthew and Shu made you feel. There was never a build-up to a battle where I thought, damn, we're screwed. How is she going to get us out of this one? With Lucretia, you knew she was always going to pull something out of her ass at the right time because she knew in advance how everything would play out, almost like she had the gift of foresight. Yet she'd almost never share her plans with anyone. I love Lucretia, I think she's an excellent character, but the fact that she was infinitely more talented and intelligent than everyone else really hurt the impact of the war battles. Where was the struggle? Where's the sense of relief at overcoming a dire situation? You know, Shu, who is arguably the most popular strategist in the series, He failed against Luca, and we would have been wiped out had it not been for Leon and Joey's betrayal. He put his life in danger and damn near killed himself just to get the better of Leon. But Lucretia is just too perfect in every way, and I don't know how to rank her. She's got a beautiful design and a great backstory, but she's too perfect with no flaws. Part of me wants to say S tier, part of me wants to say A tier, part of me wants to say B tier. I'm going to go middle ground and I'll put her in A tier, which I think is fair. And then we have Lele and Sias, the two prison guards who were stationed at Agate prison who were assigned to guard Lucretia's cell. They were both initially aligned with the Godwin faction, but they were quickly won over by Lucretia's arguments. Sias is quite a boring character and he was a total afterthought compared to Lele. They barely gave him any development or story. He's a prison guard and a stickler for the rules who eventually leads the military police after the game ends. I'm going to put Sias in the D tier because he is a very boring character. As for Lele, she's got a lot more going on for her. She ended up becoming Lucretia's apprentice and becoming quite a talented strategist in her own right. She did eventually fall in love with Lucretia and she was overly protective of her. She even shows some personal growth throughout the story where she was highly mistrusting of Shula Valia and the army's offer of friendship. But she does later admit that she was wrong for acting the way she did, so I'm going to put Lele in the B tier because she's a far more interesting character than Sias is. Then we've got another trio to rank. We've got Babaj, Sorensen and Lou. Babaj is probably the most interesting and eccentric inventor in the series. He didn't just build a new variation of an elevator, he built all sorts of contraptions. He built catapults, he invented revolving bridges, he's an expert in gears and clockwork mechanics. He dedicates himself entirely to his work. He did take on Sorensen as his apprentice, but Sorensen feels more like a house servant as he spends the majority of his time running errands for him. Fetching his meals, cleaning his house, cleaning up after him. But Sorensen was quite a talented inventor in his own right. He aided Babaj in the creation of catapults, and he created Lou's repeater crossbow. Babaj also trusted him enough to have him examine the Ashtwal runes by himself, showing just how much faith he had in his abilities. I think Sorensen might end up becoming an even better inventor than Babaj at some point. As for Lou, I know some people really hate Lou for being annoying, especially with the way she speaks. Culies, but she never bothered me. I chalked it off as her just being a fun-loving ditzy teenager who is overly excited about Babaj's inventions. I like her. Her interest goes from general childish excitement to genuine interest in the inner workings of inventions. After the game, she even becomes Babaj's new apprentice and she seems to take it very seriously. Of course, she still has her ditzy moments, but I like her character. I'm going to put Babaj in the B tier. I'm going to put Sorensen in the A tier, and I'm going to put Lou in the B tier. Then let's see, are there any other characters we can quickly get out of the way with here? Cornelio. I don't care about him at all. I actually find him to be a rather obnoxious character. I used to love that he allowed us to listen to music. That was back before the soundtracks were so easily available online on YouTube. I thought this feature was awesome. I'm going to put him in the D tier because I do find him to be an incredibly annoying character, but I still appreciate the feature that he provides. Plus, his personality is insufferable and it's incredibly tedious recruiting the elves for him. Then next up we have, some other quick ones. Takamu. I'm going to rank Takamu. He's the map guy. Thank you for the map, but as always, how do you even rank characters like this? The map guys, the item shop owners, the armorers, the blacksmiths, the sound and window setting characters. They're more often than not given half a line of backstory and then the writers call it quits. These types of characters feel like they only exist to provide you with a feature as opposed to actually being a character. Takamu, Alhazred, Mozen, Dongo, Zunda, Sairo, Shinro, Rania, Bastan. I'll put them all in the C tier, so Alazad, C tier. Now I have to go and find them all, so I might be silent for a moment. So I think that's all of them. And now that I've dragged them all up, I've realised I've put them all in the B tier by mistake. So now I gotta drag them all down to the C tier. So down you go to the C tier. All of you down, all of you down, all of you down. There we go. So that is all of them now in the C tier. Like I said, these types of characters, they feel like they exist to provide a feature as opposed to being a character. But I will give Suikoden V some credit, as they did put a little extra effort into the backstories for these characters compared to the previous games. But it still isn't really enough for them to be more than mid-tier characters. Actually, now that I think about it, Dongo, I'm going to put Dongo in the B tier because his personality really shines and he has some development with his fun little back and forths with his master Wabon. And Alazred did kind of have some story with Urim and the Book of Condemnation. But no, I'm gonna leave Alazred where he is, but I'm gonna leave Dongo in B. And since I was talking about Dongo, that brings me to his master Wabon, and with Wabon I'll rank Gund. I love these two. The Dwarves were one of the highlights of the game for me. I thought they were all so full of personality, and Wabon and Gund were the stars of the show. While they're not regulars in my party, I always add them for at least one portion per playthrough. I'm going to put both Wabon and Gund in the A tier because I really love their characters. Plus, I really love Gund's friendship with Log. I thought they were a blast together. Which brings me to Log, Lun and Kisara. And yes, I'm really trying to get characters out of the way with in lumps here because I don't want this to drag on too long. Log and Lun are really fun characters. They're the type of characters that I'd love to spend a day with just to see what kind of nonsense and shenanigans they get up to. They're lovable and they've got a really fun relationship. Log is the overprotective but lazy and irresponsible dad, dragging his daughter into trouble with his get-rich-quick schemes. Lun generally follows after him to stop him, but her curiosity always gets the better of her and she always gets caught up in his ridiculous plans. Nothing that's necessarily bad, but things that do get them into trouble. I'm going to put both Log and Lun in the A tier. I thought they were both excellent characters. As for Kisara, Log's wife and Lun's mother, how on earth Log bagged her is a greater mystery than the Sindar. She's a much more serious character than the rest of her family. She's Raja's aide, or I guess the vice commander of Rathfleet. And honestly, I don't know how she finds the time to lead Rathfleet when she constantly has to clean up the mess her husband and daughter leave behind everywhere they go. I'm going to put Kisara in the B tier. Then we have Raja, the commander of Rathfleet and the former admiral of the Falanan Royal Navy. I'm torn on her as a character. She's an excellent naval commander and she puts her people first. She cares deeply about the people of Rathfleet. The only reason she initially refused to help the prince is because she didn't want to be the pawn of some noble house like the Barrows. But what I don't like about her is her choice of student, her protege, Braham Luger. He was her apprentice at one point, but knowing what he was like and what his beliefs were, was he really the best choice you had to succeed you as Admiral of the Navy? You had no other options. Did you pick the first competent officer around you just so you could bolt off and retire and enjoy your tea parties? I'm going to put Raja in the B tier. Next up, I'll rank Toma, Talgale, Ghosh and Silva, the 4 Lord Lake characters. If anyone in the game has the right to be full of resentment and be total assholes, I think it's these guys. You can fully sympathise with each of them and you can fully understand why each feels the way they do. While Talgale does resent the Queen and the government, he holds no animosity towards the Prince because he understands that the Prince isn't at fault. While Silva, Gauche and Toma are bitter and angry over what happened, and they treat the Prince very poorly until they realise that he's sincere in wanting to help. And then you begin to see their real personalities come through. I thought they were extremely well written characters and I loved them all. Plus, Toma is personally trained by Galleon after the war with the intent of becoming a Queen's Knight. Future Toma is going to be a badass. I'm putting them all in the A tier. But could you imagine Starleap pulling like a future version of Toma as one of the characters, like a Queen's Knight Toma? I think that would be incredible, and I'll be honest, I'd spend to get him. So we just have to find the rest of them. Where is Gauche? There you are, all in the A tier. So I'll rank Dr. Murad next. Murad and Silver were both trained by the same person, and they were both equally as talented. But I felt Murad played a much larger role in the game than Silva did. Sure, Silva treated the people of Lord Lake and she helped take care of Leon, but Murad was heavily involved in the sacred games, detecting poison, and even created an antidote for Dark Arcanum. Then he spent a chunk of the war travelling around to towns caring for the injured after battles. And after the game, Murad found all of Nethergate's poisons and he was able to use those to create a lot of new groundbreaking medicines. I thought Murad was a more interesting character, but I suppose that's only because he was given a lot more to do than Silva. I'm going to put Murad in the A tier. I think he was a very well written character. So Zagai, I'll rank Zagai next. I'm going to put him in the A tier as well. He's cool, he's the big strong silent type that you feel sorry for because of his circumstances. He's just a guy from a wandering tribe who wants to be left alone to live in peace, but he got caught up in political nonsense and got imprisoned, and he was then forced to become a gladiator. I think he's got a really good story, and he's got a really cool design. Next up, I'll rank another gladiator, Shun. I love Shun. I thought he was one of the most underutilized characters in the game. You first meet him at the beginning of the game, and you quickly fall in love with his personality and his fighting style, only to be forced to wait until the very end of the game to get him as your final recruit. I hate when they save some of the more interesting characters for the end because you never get to spend any real time with them, as by this point in the story, your party is always pretty much set in stone. I understand it from a narrative perspective, it made sense, but it still annoys me because he's one of my favourites in the game. I want to go S tier, but I'll have to put him in the A tier because he just doesn't have enough involvement in the game and we don't get to see him enough. So Shun is going in the A tier. So once again, I'm just repeating, you see how many characters are ranked highly compared to how many characters are ranked poorly. So next, let's rank Boz, the ever-lovable, good-humoured and energetic Lord of Estrise. How can anyone not love him? Boz is going in the A tier. Then I'll rank Din. I think Din is quite a bland character. He's fine. There's nothing wrong with him. He plays a good role in the story. He's a decent character. He's just quite bland, and for that, he's going in the B tier. Then, Solus Ralbel, the Lord of Sable, whatever. He's a fine character. I'm going to put him in the C tier. You know, he's okay. And then next, I'll rank Isato. He's about as inflexible and strict as they come, but he's fiercely loyal to Haswar because I believe she prohibited the mining of gold near Lunas, and that protected the environment around Isato's hometown of Alsaid. I know many won't agree, but I think he's an excellent character and he's going in the A tier. And next I'll rank Erda. Excuse my language, but she's a bitch. But that's why I love her so much. That icy attitude and demeanour of hers is hot. I'd say I can fix her, but I don't want to fix her. I'd let her ruin me. S tier. No, but in all seriousness, she is a bitch. She looks down on other races as barbaric and lesser beings, particularly humans. She scoffs at you, she's disgusted by you, you're an insect to her. All she wants is to bring Isato home and stay the hell away from humans. It's kind of disappointing we never got to see their hometown of Alsaid. Are all elves kind of bitchy with a superiority complex like Urda? Are there more of them like Isato? I would have loved to have known. I do want to put her in the S tier, but that's being way too generous. She's going to have to go in the S tier, or in the A tier. Another quick one would be Haleth. He's corrupt to the core, he's shady as hell, and engages in everything and anything you can think of. He takes bribes, he embezzles, he forges documents, he smuggles, you name it, he does it. Good or bad, if the price is right, he's your guy. And when you finally recruit him, what's the first thing he does? He organises dragon horse races in your castle and gets everyone to start gambling. He's done terrible things, he's done good things, but I'll always love him for giving us the dragon horse races. I'm going to put Haleth into the B tier. Next up, I'll rank Bergen and Levi. I feel really bad for Bergen. Levi mistreats him and strings him along with false promises of teaching him magic, all while treating him as a servant and making him do all the hard labour jobs. He does end up forming a bond and developing a strong friendship with Dongo and Sorensen over their similar situations with their masters. And by the end of the game, he does leave Levi and goes back to the Dwarves, presumably to pick up a more Dwarven trade. I'm going to put Bergen in the B tier. I thought he was a really interesting character. As for Levi, Levi is a real dick, but he's a fascinating character. He's a rune scholar whose only interest is researching rune magic. Interestingly, his serpentine staff is able to speak as it communicates with Byakurin, and the two have a full-blown conversation. A conversation that Levi is somehow able to understand and translate. How is his staff sentient? Where did he get a sentient staff? Is this the result of his magical research? Is there somehow a rune involved? Is there something more to the staff? I don't know, but I want to find out. I'm putting Levi in the A tier. Which brings me to Norma and Ernst. These are two wonderful characters with a fascinating story to tell, and one that unfortunately we may never find out. They're from the Kingdom of Zelant, an island kingdom to the northwest of Falena. Ernst, while exploring some runes, came across a beast rune, not to be confused with the beast rune, one of the 27 true runes from Suikoden 2. As soon as he came in contact with this beast rune, the rune transformed him into a leopard. He can temporarily turn back into a human for very sharp bursts, and on the night of a full moon, the curse is temporarily lifted. We don't know the details of what happened in the runes or how they came into contact with the beast rune, but Norma blames herself for what happened to Ernst. So the two of them travelled to Falena to seek out a powerful magician to help them break the curse. The prince then introduces them to Levi, and following the events of the game, the three of them travel back to Zelant to try and break the curse. I think they've got a great story to tell, and it's one that could delve into the nature of the runes themselves. It could teach us about the beast rune, it could teach us about Zelant and their culture. It's a short story that could really expand on the lore. It's a story I've always been interested in, and it's one that I hope we find out one day. I love both of these characters, and I'm going to put both of them into the A tier. Ernst, you go in the A tier, and Norma, you go in the A tier. Next up, Shunmin and Retsu. Seeing Retsu and Shunmin was a bittersweet experience. It was lovely seeing them both so happy and full of joy together, but it was heartbreaking at the same time because we know how their story ends from Suikoden 2. I'm going to put Retsu and Shunmin in the A tier. Then there are still more groups we can get through here. We've got Roy, Phelan, and Phelan. Roy is a really interesting character. I remember hating him on my first playthrough because of everything he'd done when I first met him. But then I chose to stand my ground at Ceres Lake, and seeing how Roy acted during that battle and what happened to him, it really changed my opinion on him at the time. I've since grown to like his character a lot more, and I fully understand his reasoning for doing everything he did. He's an orphan who grew up on the streets of Rainwall, having to scrape, claw, and fight for every scrap of food he's ever had. He bears an uncanny resemblance to the prince, and that left him feeling bitter and jealous of the prince who grew up in a life of luxury, wanting for nothing. So Roy decided, I'm going to parade myself as the prince to get everything I deserve in life. He's one of the most interesting characters in the game, and after the war, he decides to put his talents to good use and travels north to become an actor. I'm going to put Roy in the S tier. Maybe some people won't agree with that, but I think he is a very fascinating character. As for Phelan and Phelan, I like them both. They're both orphans from Rainwall, just like Rye. They grew up on the streets together, but unlike Rye, they don't hold any bitterness or resentment towards anyone. They're quite friendly. At the end of the game, they both chased after Rye to join his theatre group, which, it's understandable. They're childhood friends, they're lifelong friends, they're so used to being together, they didn't want to be apart. But if I'm remembering correctly, if Rye dies, Phelan instead trains to join the Dragon Cavalry and becomes the second female rider after Lun. I think that's a much better and far more interesting ending than chasing after Rye. I love their combat styles too. The boomerang is a lot of fun and she kind of reminded me a bit of Millie from Suikoden 2. I'm going to put both of these characters in the A tier. And I just realised there's an Island Nations character I forgot to rank earlier, so I'm going to rank her now, and that is Chisato. I want to love her far more than I do because she's a really fun character and her puppet show with Kika and Brando is great. I think she was a real missed opportunity character. Instead of having her change her character's voice sets, they should have had her do puppet shows. I think that would have been a really fun way to lore drop some historical stories and expand on some lore. I'm going to put her in the B tier, but she really could have been an A tier character. It's a real shame they didn't take advantage of her strengths and charm by giving her more to do. Next I'm going to rank Lorelei. I ranked her high in previous videos and I'm ranking her high again. She is staying in the S tier. You all know by now, Lorelei is my girl. She's about as average as a character comes in terms of combat, but she's always been one of my favourites. Ever since my first playthrough of Suikoden 1, I loved her character and she's been one of my go-tos in every game she's appeared in so far. I was thrilled to see her again in Suikoden 5 and to see her get some actual story involvement that gave her opportunities to shine. Seeing her interact with Killy and Swig here really fleshed her out, and it does make you appreciate her more in the first two games. Though as always, anything involving the Sindar left us with more questions than answers. Which takes me to Killy and Zweig. I rated Killy quite poorly in the Suikoden 2 video because I absolutely despised his character. Let's be real, the only reason people liked him in Suikoden 2 is because he was broken and overpowered in combat. Strip away his combat ability and what have you got? An asshole with a nice looking coat. Suikoden 5 lets him shine a little bit more. We get to see his rivalry with Lorelei, who he treats more as an irritating inconvenience than a rival, while she views him more as a threat to her own hunt into the Sindar. I'm going to bump him up to the B tier here because while I like his story and his involvement, I still dislike him as a character. That leaves Zweig. Unlike Lorelei and Killy, who are Sindar hunters, Zweig is an archaeologist and his interest in the Sindar is purely academical. Strictly from a story perspective, he's a far more compelling character than Lorelei and Killy combined. With all of his notes on the Sindar, all of his translations and his secret lab, you know he's a treasure trove of information on the Sindar, which unfortunately the developers never delved into. I think he's got a really cool design too. Maybe this is a controversial pick, but I'm going to put him in the S tier. By the way, Killy shared a story with Zweig about the Crimson Pilgrims. Who are they? Are they a Sindar clan or have they some kind of relation to the Sindar? There must be some connection as Zweig looked into it. He dug deep into Killy's story and he thought he found their home. But all he found was a large, singular tree with nothing else. Interestingly, Vicky can mess up teleporting and send you to a normally inaccessible area on the world map, which consists of a giant tree. Is there something to that and that's the location Zweig finds? Or was the story nothing more than Killy messing with Zweig to throw him off the track? Who knows? Also, Lorelei robbed him of all of his notes regarding the Sindar while he was out searching for the Crimson Pilgrim's home. I think they made for a really interesting trio and I feel really bad for Zweig. Next up, I'm going to rank Marina. Is she a nice person? Yeah, but her love for Belkut caused her to make an incredibly selfish decision. A decision that you could argue is a large part of what actually caused the war. If not for her, Belku probably would have won the tournament. Gazelle never would have had Lim's hand in marriage, and by extension the throne. I'm sure the Godwins would have tried to find another way to get what they wanted, but probably not to the same success. I don't know how to feel about her. She's a sweet girl who's head over heels in love with Belkut, but her jealousy and immaturity annoys me to no end. She's well written, and I'm torn between strongly disliking her and understanding her. Do I go C tier? Do I go lower? I'll go C tier. I think C tier is fair. Then next up we have Belkut. Belkut has an excellent story, and he's easily up there with the most interesting and best characters in the game. He's a former slave who was forced to become a gladiator until he finally escaped and fled the country. He wound up in Kanakhan, where he learned the falcon fighting style, which we all know and love from Valyria and Anita. He worked his ass off and trained to become one of the best swordsmen around, and when he heard the Sacred Games were being held again, he travelled back to Falena to compete, with the sole goal of abolishing the gladiatorial system and slavery. How can you not love Belkut? He's another character whose backstory is so interesting that he deserves his own short story. I'm putting Belkut in the S tier. And then we have Hazuki. Hazuki has a somewhat interesting backstory. She's from the same unnamed country as Genshu from Suikoden 2. She's got a one-sided rivalry going on with Belkut. They had a sparring match and she got whooped, which really humbled her. Now she's set out to defeat him and refuses to return home until she does so. During her travels, she competed in tournaments to hone her skills, and in one of those tournaments she encountered Nikia. And in one of her travels she even encountered Gavaya. In one of her suggestion box letters, she states that if she knew Gavaya was in Falena, she never would have come to the country. I feel you, Hazuki. He's a creep. I might put her... No. I'm not going to put her in the B tier. I'm going to bump her up to the A tier. And the reason I'm going to put her in the A tier is because she got so annoyed by Gavaya's persistent proposals that she drew her sword on him and I think threatened to kill him. You know, the only thing I dislike about Hazuki is that she didn't kill Gavaya when she had the chance. And since she met Nikia before, we're going to rank Nikia. She is one of my favourites. She's a wandering martial artist who fights to make a living, but she usually just fights for food. You have to love Nikia's personality. As Aboro puts it, she's always so bright and bubbly. Her skill as a martial artist is surpassed only by her gluttony. She's an absolute pig who only cares about eating. I think she's a wonderful character. She's funny, she's got a great design, and she kicks ass. I'm going to put Nikia in the S tier. She's one of my favourites. So we're getting near the end here. There's not many characters left. I'm surprised I've waited this long to rank Norden, so let's rank Norden. I think he's a character you have to feel for. He was the vice commander of the Rainwall Garrison and he served under Yoram Barrows. Could you imagine what that's like? During the Lord Lake Rebellion, Yoram ordered him to engage the protesters, which escalated the situation into a riot, which then caused the protests to spread beyond Lord Lake, which was the Barrows' plan all along, which resulted in the theft of the Dawn Rune and the near destruction of Lord Lake. Norden resigned in disgust, and suffering from the trauma of what he did and what he witnessed, he turned to alcohol to ease his pain, which led to him spiralling into depression, which led to his wife leaving him. To be honest, I'm surprised the Barrows didn't just have him killed off and made it look like a drunken accident instead of paying him off and then spending a fortune having him constantly shadowed and watched. I'm going to put Norden in the B tier because while I do feel bad for him, he's still largely responsible for his own actions, orders or not. He's a really well written character. Then we have Fuyo, Oboro, Shigure and Sagiri, the Oboro detective agency. The whole agency would collapse without Fuyo. She's the heart and soul of the agency. She handles all of the clerical work, the accounting work, and she provides the traumatized Shigure and Sagiri with a loving, stable environment. Plus, I love Fatas. It's an incredibly addicting minigame. I'm going to put Fuyo in the A tier. Then there's Oboro. He grew up within Nethergate and he served as the head of their intelligence division. This gave him a rather different perspective compared to other members of the organisation as he got to know the world outside of Nethergate. When Arshtat and Ferret disbanded Nethergate, Oboro was one of the few leaders within the organisation that agreed with the plan. He took Sagiri and Shigure with him and tried to live normal lives while putting their skills to use as detectives. Oboro is an excellent character and his investigations give us a chunk of lore and background information, and you have to love him for that. I am going to put Oboro in the A tier. Then we have Shigure and Sagiri, who were both taken in by Nethergate as young children and ruthlessly trained for the sole purpose of being cold-blooded assassins. The training they received left Shigure near permanently expressionless, and Sagiri was left unable to make any facial expression beyond a smile. Is she sad? Is she happy? Is she hurting? You'll never know because her expression never changes. I think their backstories are tragic. Nethergate is an interesting concept and one that wasn't explored as deeply as it should have been. I'm putting both Shigure and Sagiri in the A tier. And then that brings me to Nakula. Nakula is another really interesting but woefully underutilized character. He has a burning hatred for Nethergate and his goal is to hunt them all down and kill every last one of them. His father was murdered by Sagiri back when she was just a child and still a member of Nethergate. The smile on her face as she killed his dad is burned into Nakula's memory. Now, he did have a somewhat change of heart when the truth about Nethergate was explained to him, but he is a woefully underutilized character. He could have had an incredibly big arc to play in the game if Nethergate had a bigger role. I'm going to put Nakula in the A tier, but honestly, he's an A tier character that could be an S tier character. Nethergate should have had a much bigger involvement in the game than they did. Oboro and Nakula travelled to Nagaria after the game to hunt down Nethergate members for different reasons. We need a continuation of that story. Could we see some of that in a Starleap chapter? If not, I'd love to get a light novel or a short story on Nethergate. I think it's a really interesting concept. But this is one of the things that I both love and hate about Suikoden, particularly Suikoden 5, is that they love name dropping and lore dropping locations, organizations and events, feeding you just enough information to get you invested, and then they yank it away from you and leave you begging for more, and it eats you alive because you know you'll never get the answers. Now here we are, the final four: Erish, Jean, Leknot and Zarase. So Leknot's going to be a quick and easy one. I'm going to put her in the A tier, which is where I think I've put her in every ranking video so far. In Suikoden 5, she really takes a backseat in the game, and her role is largely fulfilled by Zarase, who, in truth, kind of annoys me. Look, Zarase has a very powerful rune, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people love using her in their party. But the power of her rune aside, was anybody else really annoyed by how bitchy, vague and cryptic she was about everything? I mean, why are these types of characters always so evasive about answering everything? I can understand not blabbing every bit of information to every random person, but you can't even explain things to people chosen by the true runes themselves? You can't even drip feed us some information? What is it they know that they're withholding? What are they protecting? Why do even the true rune bearers need to be kept totally in the dark? Now, that all said, all of that complaining about her does make her an interesting character, as well as the fact that she has some kind of connection to the Night Rune and she appears familiar with Jean. Suikoden 5 introduced us to far too many new mysteries with no answers. You can only dangle the carrot for so long before it starts to get irritating for the fans. I'm going to put Zarase in the B tier because I find her interesting, but I'm also irritated by her attitude. And speaking of dangling carrots, Jean. Suikoden 5 introduced a whole new layer, or layers, to Jean. They introduced the ancient Armas dynasty, a long-destroyed nation that once inhabited the southern continent. A nation which Jean appears to have some kind of connection to. Geno senses Jean is very old, and Rania detects that Jean's sound is different from everyone else's. Every appearance Jean makes only adds to her mystery, and we're further away from an answer now than we were originally. I did love her role in this game though, despite the increased mysteries. She played a role in the main story with the Twilight Rune. She had her own side quest that introduced us to the Ancient Arma's runes and to Erish, and her role in the Blind Man's Bluff card game made her the most distracting opponent possible. The developers certainly didn't hold back on the jiggle. I'm putting Jean in the S tier here. And then finally we have Erish, yet another dangling carrot. Erish is a friend of Jean's and is another character that brings more questions and introduces more mysteries than she answers. Erish is a senior member of Nagaria's clergy, a position that's only available to those over 40, but Erish is quite small and youthful looking. Now she could just be short and aging well, but none of us believe that, do we? There's more to her than meets the eye. She speaks in the third person, she's very familiar with Jean, although as with anything involving Jean, the relationship is a mystery. She refers to her body as a vessel, she's quite familiar with the Ancient Arma's runes and even wants to seal away the big bad at the end of it. And when she leaves after the war is over, the runes become completely accessible, proving her connection to the Ancient Arma's dynasty. I'm putting Erish in the A tier. You know, at some point, they actually have to give us the carrot they're dangling instead of continuously adding more dangling carrots. If all they do is continue to add more mystery without ever explaining past mysteries or even drip feeding little tidbits of information, I begin to lose interest in the mystery, which is why I don't care about Peshmerga and Uber. So I really hope Starleap begins to explain many of these mysteries. Anyway, that's it for my Suikoden V character ranking video. Again, this is not a combat tier list, this is a personal favourites ranking list. Let me know what your thoughts are about the characters below. How do you feel about them? Who are your favourites? Who are your least favourites? Are you sick and tired of the ever-increasing mysteries with no answers? Or the many character stories that are left unanswered and unexplored? What mysteries, stories and characters do you hope to see fleshed out more in the future? Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.